Hey everyone! Ready to dive into Tirana? We've got this traveler's guide, and it's packed with cool stuff to make sure your trip is unforgettable. We're talking those insider tips, those hidden gems, the things that'll make you feel like a local, not just a tourist.
Yeah. And you know what's so captivating about Tirana? It's this amazing mix of history and modern life.
Hmm.
Like you step back in time, but with a vibrant, contemporary energy.
I love that. Okay, so first up, Skanderbeg Square. It's like the heart of the city. You can really get a feel for Tirana just by hanging out there.
Totally. Picture yourself, right? You're in Skanderbeg Square,
Yeah.
maybe snapping a selfie with the Skanderbeg statue and just taking it all in.
Okay, that's going on the itinerary for sure. And speaking of history, I was reading that Tirana has seen a lot of changes over the years.
Oh, yeah. I mean, think about it. From Ottoman rule to being kind of isolated during the communist regime to, now this emergence onto the world stage.
Wow. So, the city itself reflects its journey through time. That's fascinating. And the guide mentions the Tirana clock tower. You can climb up and get these crazy panoramic views of the whole city and even the mountains.
For sure. Climbing that tower, it's like a little adventure in itself.
Yeah.
Built way back in 1822. And you get this incredible perspective,
Yeah.
like a bird's eye view of how the city has grown and changed over centuries.
Okay, so I'm adding climb Tirana clock tower to my list right now. Early morning to beat the crowds. Check. Now, I have to admit, when I hear castle, I think fairy tale fortress, but Tirana castle seems different.
It's definitely not your typical castle. Imagine those old walls, but instead of grand halls, you've got trendy bars and restaurants nestled in there.
So they took something old and made it new again. I love that. The guide even recommends grabbing a crepe at a place called Fluffy Home Crepe. Inside the castle walls, I'm sold.
Right, crepes and castles. Doesn't get much better than that. But, speaking of blending old and new, let's talk about Tirana's outdoor spaces.
Oh, yes. The guide raves about Tirana Park, this huge green oasis right in the city.
It's perfect for a walk or even a romantic stroll. Some bird watching, maybe.
I actually read that Tirana has been really focused on creating green spaces and making the city more pedestrian friendly.
It's true. It's like they're really working on creating that balance between, city life and nature.
Yeah.
And they've done a fantastic job.
That's so cool. And the guide mentions Zoo Park Tirana, the only zoo in all of Albania. They've recently renovated and expanded it.
Oh, yeah. They have lions, tigers, wolves, bears, all the cool animals. But get this, they have a dinosaur zone, too.
Wait, dinosaurs. Okay, now I'm intrigued. So it's educational and exciting.
Exactly. And, if you're looking for something more peaceful after the zoo, the botanical gardens are just a short walk away.
Thousands of plant species. Perfect.
Ugh.
Okay, so we've got history, we've got outdoor spaces, but what about those spots that might surprise people? The Pyramid of Tirana kind of jumped out at me. What is that all about?
Ugh, the pyramid. Such a fascinating story. Originally, it was a museum dedicated to Albania's former communist leader, but now they're transforming it into this multifunctional space for the community.
So it's like a symbol of the city shedding its old identity and embracing something new.
Yeah, for sure. And they're planning to have cafes, workshops, community hubs, even art and tech exhibits.
I love how they're not just tearing things down, but finding creative ways to make them relevant to, to modern life. And then there's B1K Art 1 and 2. Those sound intense.
They are. These museums are actually housed in former bunkers, and they offer a really, really powerful look into Albania's communist past.
Okay, so I have to ask, what was it like living in Albania under communist rule? I know it was a time of isolation and strict control, but I'd love to hear more about how it actually impacted the country and the people.
It was a really difficult time. The country was cut off from the rest of the world. People lived under constant surveillance. It was kind of fear and repression. And actually, Bunkart 1, which is outside the city, was built as an atomic bunker for the country's leaders.
Wow. That's chilling. And Bunker Art 2.
That one's right in the city center.
There.
It was used for, interrogations and imprisonment.
It's hard to imagine what that must have been like, but it seems so important to, understand that part of Albania's history. Visiting these bunkers must be a really powerful experience.
Oh, absolutely. It's a way to, connect with that past and to really appreciate the resilience of the Albanian people.
Okay, so we've talked about history, outdoor spaces, even those intense reminders of the past. What about some hidden gems and local experiences? The guide mentions the Etem Bey Mosque.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's a gorgeous example of Ottoman architecture.
The guide actually recommends going inside to see the frescoes. They depict nature scenes, which I found interesting because, you usually think of mosques having those geometric patterns and calligraphy.
Yeah, it's a unique feature of this mosque, for sure. The frescoes add this sense of peace and beauty to this space. And speaking of beauty, the guide also raves about the new bazaar, or Pazari Iri.
Oh, yeah, the new bazaar. I love exploring local markets. What are some must-try Albanian dishes?
Well, you can't go to Tirana without trying tavikosi. It's this traditional dish made with lamb, rice, yogurt, and eggs, all baked in a clay pot.
Ooh, that sounds good, but I'm more of a vegetarian. Are there any vegetarian-friendly Albanian dishes?
Of course, you're
Yeah.
in luck. There's this amazing dish called byrek. It's a savory pastry, and it can be filled with spinach or cheese or like other vegetables.
Okay, Bayrak, I'm adding it to the list. That sounds amazing. The guide also mentions the Namazga Mosque, which I heard is brand new and huge.
It is. It's actually the largest mosque in the Balkans, and it's set to become Tirana's main mosque. It's definitely worth checking out. It's stunning. These brilliant blue domes and these towering minarets.
Wow, that's incredible. It sounds like we've covered a lot, but, I have a feeling this is just scratching the surface of what Tirana has to offer.
Oh, for sure. Tirana is a city full of surprises. There's always something new to discover.
Hmm.
But before we move on to some practical tips for your trip, let's pause for a sec. What has stood out to you the most so far? What are you most excited to experience in Tirana? It's really cool to unpack all these different sides of Tirana, right? From the history to the modern stuff to the stories about the bunkers. It's a lot to think about.
I know. It's like every place we talk about shows us something new about the city. But before we get too carried away, let's talk about the practical stuff for a sec. What about getting around Tirana? What did the guide say?
So Tirana has a pretty decent public transportation system. Buses are a good way to get around the city, even to some towns nearby. And taxis are pretty easy to find too.
Oh, good. So there are options. That's good to know. What about safety? Every city has areas you got to be more careful in, but what did the guide say about Tirana overall?
What stuck out to me was that the guide really emphasized how safe Tirana is for travelers. Of course, you should always be aware of your surroundings, but they made it clear that you should feel comfortable exploring.
That's good to hear. It's always nice to feel safe when you're traveling. Did they have any tips for connecting with the local culture?
They did. They suggested learning a few basic Albanian phrases, even just simple greetings like hello and thank you. It can really make a difference when you're interacting with locals.
I can see that. It shows you're making an effort even if you aren't fluent, right? What about things like currency and tipping?
Right, so the currency in Albania is the lek.
Yep.
Some places might take euros, but it's better to exchange your money for lek to get the best rates. And tipping isn't mandatory, but it's definitely appreciated, especially in restaurants and taxis.
Okay, got it. Like it is. So after doing all this research, what are you personally most excited to see in Tirana?
Honestly, it's got to be Bunkart. To actually go inside those bunkers, those places that hold so much history, it's intense, and to see how they've turned them into museums. Wow.
I totally get it. It's like touching history. And after hearing about the frescoes in the Edhembe Mosque, I'm really curious to see those. It's not what you usually expect to find in a mosque, so that's really interesting to me. And of course, that Tavi Kosi you talked about. I gotta try it.
It sounds like your trip is already shaping up. But before you go, let's take a moment to think about how you can personalize your experience. We've given you the highlights, but the best trips are the ones that really match your interests.
Totally. Like if you're into history, maybe you spend more time at the National History Museum or exploring those castles. And if food is your thing, well, there are markets and cafes and restaurants galore.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to change your plans if something catches your eye. Sometimes the best memories come from those unplanned moments when you discover something new.
Absolutely. It's about following those little threads of curiosity, right? You never know what you might find.
Speaking of finding things, remember how we talked about the Pyramid of Tirana being turned into a space for the community? It got me thinking about how cities change over time and how things from the past can get new meaning.
Right. Like what other things in Tirana might be going through changes like that? Or what about the city's art scene? I bet there are artists doing really interesting things, commenting on the city's past, present, and future.
It just goes to show that travel is about more than just seeing sights. It's about the stories behind those sights. It's about asking questions, making connections, and seeing the bigger picture.
And isn't that what makes a place like Tirana so cool? It's not just pretty, it's a city with layers. Layers of history and culture just waiting to be discovered.
Exactly. And who better to discover them than someone who's coming to it with fresh eyes and a sense of curiosity?
Okay, I'm ready to book my flight, but before I do, one last question. What final thought-provoking question or idea would you leave our listener with as they plan their trip to Tirana?
That's a good one. I think I would ask, how has Tirana's unique blend of history, culture, and rapid modernization shaped the lives and perspectives of its people? What kind of conversations could you have? What kind of insights could you gain by talking to the locals and listening to their stories?
Wow, that's a really powerful question. It makes you realize that travel is so much more than just seeing the sights. It's about connecting with people and understanding their experiences.
Totally. It's those connections that make a place come alive. And I have a feeling that the people in Tirana, with their history and resilience, they probably have some incredible stories to share.
I can already picture those conversations, those moments of sharing. Okay, so we've been talking about this traveler's guide, but is there anything else about Tirana that really surprised you or that you found especially fascinating?
As we were talking about Tirana's history and how fast it's modernizing, something kind of clicked for me. I remembered reading about how Albania, and Tirana in particular, actually played a role in the development of the internet.
Wait, really? I had no idea. Tell me more.
So back in the 90s, during a time of a lot of political and social change in Albania, internet technology started to, emerge there. And get this, Tirana was one of the first cities in the Balkans to have internet access.
That's incredible. It's like this hidden piece of tech history.
It is. And it just goes to show you that innovation can happen in the most unexpected places, often during times of, big upheaval and change.
It makes you wonder what other hidden stories are waiting to be discovered in Tirana. It seems like this city that's constantly changing, defying expectations.
It's writing its own story. And
Yeah.
you know what? You have the chance to be a part of that story, to walk those streets, to feel that energy, to see it all firsthand.
Okay, I'm sold. Tirana's officially at the top of my travel list.
Sounds like you're ready for your own deep dive into Tirana.
I am. But before we wrap up, I want to make sure our listeners are ready for their adventures too. What final piece of advice or inspiration would you give them?
I would say this: embrace the unexpected. Be open to those chance moments that often lead to the most amazing experiences. Talk to the locals, listen to their stories, and let yourself be surprised. Because in those moments of real connection, that's where the magic of travel really happens.
That's beautiful. So to our listeners, as you pack your bags and get ready for Tirana, remember that this is more than just a trip. It's a chance to explore, connect, and discover.
Have a wonderful trip and let us know all about it when you get back. We can't wait to hear about your adventures.
And that's a wrap on our Tirana deep dive. Thanks for joining us.